is the Global St Andrews Society amplifying Scotland's reputation on climate change?
Yeah, so we've been working really hard with a number of organizations around the world to use our network to amplify the message of climate change. We've been working with the Scottish Fuel Change, Scottish Net Zero Community. We also put together a challenge with the New York Times to help 16 to 24-year-olds get involved in the community and involved in the future of climate change in terms of what they can do to make things better in the world. And so the Global St Andrews Society has around 70 societies around the world in our network who have been very focused on, Scotland in the past, using the diaspora around the world. And these people are receiving information from, through the Global St Andrews Society from Scotland to help amplify messages in their areas as well. And so we are technically a kind of connecting framework for all of the local societies around the globe.
I just want to take a step back there, because you've mentioned there's over 70 Global St Andrews societies around the world. You're kind of connecting hubs. So
70 local societies.
70 local.
Mm-hmm.
So what is the Global St Andrews Society all about then, and why is it important?
Thank you. So we're really a framework, a connecting framework for all of the local St Andrews societies around the world. So if you can imagine, there's chapters in Singapore, there's a chapter in Malaysia, there's a chapter in China, there's many, many chapters in the United States of America. And all of them are celebrating Scottish culture and Scottish heritage in their own local way. And so, I've spoken to many of the societies, and while their mission and their memberships kind of vary, they all still share the same Scottish common values to support Scottish culture, to share Scottish culture, and to celebrate in their local communities with the Scottish diaspora that they have. These are primarily volunteer organizations, and so access to basic functions for them, like membership management systems or billing or access to goods and services, can be challenging. And so the Global St Andrews Society that we have really helps them access solutions to benefit the work that they're doing on a local level, and give them access also to content and to news that is going on in Scotland that they can just share out with their membership on a very simple basis.
That's quite impressive. I mean, I knew that Scotland was well regarded around the world, and I've been to the United States, and I've seen better, Highland games sometimes in the United States than I have in Scotland. But to really realise that scope of 70 chapters that you've got and a global community all connecting, that's really impressive. And you talked there about celebrating Scottish culture and sharing news about what's going on. So a lot of the time when people think about Scotland, they think about tartan, they think about bagpipes, they think about Loch Ness Monster, might even go on a few more in terms of the stereotypes that we've got. But what really is the reputation of Scotland on a global platform?
That is such a great question. Scotland, its brand perception outside of Scotland, there's a lot of people who do think haggis, tartan, whiskey, bagpipes, Nessie. And that's probably the first thing that they think when they think of Scotland, in addition to our great castles and scenery. And it's not known as well for its innovation and its leadership in technology. And I think I'm both kind of enamored and frustrated at times with the international perceptions of Scotland as a country by many people around the world who have or have not visited and spent time with Scots. We have a great legacy in, the tartans and the whiskies behind us. But what is most important to me now, and I think to many people specifically when it comes to climate change, is that we not only focus on our past and our heritage, but we spend more time pointing to the future. Scotland has a great number of inventors. We're a nation of inventors. And at this time, it's important that we really focus on our contributions in the technology on the global stage with respect to climate change, and share that message out. I know that we're doing, awesome things like the tidal power solution that's positioned off the Orkney Islands in the North Sea, built by Scotland's orbital marine power. That's just one example of great technology that Scotland is building right now that should be amplified around the world. There are many things that we're doing that we may not be the leader in terms of doing it and making a difference in the world, but our technology can really make the difference with other countries as well. And I think that this is really where we are. It's so important to start looking forward instead of spending our time, looking in the rearview mirror.
So if you look forward, I mean, you talked about Scotland's capacity for innovation and leadership, especially in tech. So how do you see Scotland's future being talked about 10 years from now? If you fast forward, not even 10 years, let's go to 2045 and do a little bit of a fast forward exercise here, Irene. How do you see Scotland being talked about and being known about in 2045?
I would love to see Scotland being talked about as the country that helped save the planet, right? I mean, we have the tools, we have the knowledge, we have the intelligence, we have the sophistication, we have the ability to create technologies and solutions that can be adopted by other countries, by corporations, even by small businesses, by consumers, even just technologies that I could be using in my home to help reduce the emissions that we have right now and put us on that global scale. I think Scotland has the ability to do this. And, my mission is to help put Scotland's reputation on that global map, where people start to know more about what we're doing and start to determine how they can adopt these solutions in their own environments to make the world a better place.
And I think it's really important what you've said there, that this is what you'd like to see for Scotland in 2045, because the previous session that is getting played before yours on the day, Izzy is talking about why Scotland is the perfect test bed for exactly what you're talking about here with the innovation and the leadership in tech. And one of the key things when I was speaking to Izzy to talk about what she was going to say is that really captivated me is the size of Scotland, the shape of Scotland with its population of 5 million really allows us to take those things like the tidal power example that you were talking about there, deploy them, and then figure out how to deploy them at scale and create joined up solutions that can really be amplified and then deployed in other areas around the world.
That's right. And I think, Scotland is small enough to be a test bed for these kind of activities, not large enough to cause damage if stuff doesn't work, but it is strong enough to amplify the message and to share the technologies in the success stories that we have to help everybody else. And I think that we're really at a point with the climate change that it's going to take more than a village. The ideas start in a village. We can think locally or act locally, but we need to think globally in terms of how things are shared out through the globe and adopted to make things happen.
Yeah. So then what is the potential role of Scots around the world to not just amplify the successes and share the successes of Scotland, but really amplify our capacity for that global climate action that you just talked about there?
Yeah. There's a lot that people can do to just even get involved, to start in their local communities, create groups, create messaging, work with small businesses or corporations to start adopting activities that will contribute to lower emissions. It's even if everybody took like one less flight a year, that would make a big difference, and there are things that everybody can be doing in their home. There are things that people can be doing in their small business, and there are certainly things that corporations can be doing to help lower the emissions. And so by sharing the ideas and the concepts that come out of Scotland, we can help to encourage more active participation around the world as well.
I think that's really powerful. I mean, I'm just sitting thinking of these 70 networks that you've got in local chapters and the potential reach and capacity of some really innovative community-based solution that then you're able to push out throughout your networks and inspire these voluntary organizations to share that news and hopefully catalyze change within their local communities as well. So it's very much, you brought it back to that individual action that we can take within our own homes if we're small business owners, but also recognizing the big corporations. But I think it's the power of what you're also highlighting here, that the capacity of, it's the Margaret Mead quote, never doubt that a small group of committed citizens are capable of changing the world. In fact, it's the only thing that it is. And I know I have paraphrased that really, really badly, but that seems to be the essence of what you're creating and what the Global St Andrews Society is about, because these are people who are passionate about Scotland, saying we're going to come together as voluntary organisations so that we can share Scotland's reputation, share Scotland's brand. They're embedded in their local communities, so when there are these innovative, solutions that are coming out of Scotland, they've then got the networks to go and say, look, how do we start deploying this in our own community? We know it works, and I mean, imagine the potential. I'm getting quite caught up in the thought of, here's a really innovative community-based solution, and then it can be deployed throughout 70 local communities, for example, through the Global St Andrews Society. And then what really would be the potential of that if you're measuring carbon emissions and how you could actually track and monitor that?
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly the model. And so all of these different communities are working on their own to do what's right for their community, their people. The Scottish diaspora is everywhere around the world, and that's what makes it work, because we're already starting with a receptive audience. Here you have Scottish people who are living overseas, or people who have family from Scotland, or lineage. My great grandmother was a McLaren, and they have an interest already. And so it's not like you're trying to share something that people don't have an interest in knowing about. The connection is Scotland. And I think this is something that many Scots who are living in Scotland kind of underestimate, the power of the Scottish brand in itself. Scotland has a very strong brand outside of Scotland, and it's something that can be capitalized in on a lot more than just the tartan and the whiskey trades. We can use the diaspora of Scotland and our networks to share out more important messages that have a more immediate need, for people's attention.
Yeah. And there's 2 points there which I think are really powerful. You're mentioning people have connections and roots back to Scotland. And I once read somewhere that there are more people with Scots ancestry in the United States alone than there is in Scotland. And that for me is mind-boggling, to sit and think of this connection and this relationship of how that could be used to catalyze action simply through those roots. But it goes on to
just on that point, actually, for scale and reference, the Pleasanton Highland Games in California is, I believe, the world's largest Highland Games ever. And just for scale, there is 50,000 people that will attend one weekend of the games.
Wow.
You could imagine that versus the Highland Games in Crieff, which I love to attend. But there's not 50,000 people there. I mean, the scale of what we're talking about here is pretty powerful. When you think about the amplification, it truly is amplification, outside of Scotland.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking of what's the potential then to, use something like the Highland Games that you've just mentioned there to mobilise 50,000 people with a connection to Scotland to really amplify that movement. And, the second point that I wanted to come back to was this brand that you keep on talking about in terms of Scotland. And I think, it's interesting for people being in Scotland, and I've lived in Scotland, Irene, and I've lived abroad. And it was only when I was able to step out of Scotland and look back, I was like, wow, that's a lot cooler than what I actually think it was or
Yeah.
thought it was growing up. You know, I'm able to see with different eyes. And I'm kind of wondering if that's part and parcel of the passion that you're talking about here with the diaspora, that you're able to step out of your own country and turn around and go, actually, that's got a lot of good stuff that we maybe
Yeah.
didn't take, you know, didn't recognize, didn't appreciate, and we want to cultivate that a lot more because we can see it differently now.
But that is absolutely correct. And I will tell you on a personal level, I grew up in Edinburgh. I was educated in Edinburgh, and then I backpacked around the world for a year. And I went all over the world, you know, India, Malaysia, Singapore, Australia, the US, Hong Kong. And it wasn't until the day that I landed back into Edinburgh, I flew into London, I got the train up to Edinburgh, and I came out of Waverley and I saw this huge, magnificent castle on the hill. And I was like, oh, I had no idea. The city that I grew up in was by far the most beautiful city that I had seen in my life. And I'd been to all these other places, and I had never appreciated what I had on my own back doorstep until I'd seen everything else. And so the perceptions of Scotland outside of Scotland are truly magnificent. People think Scotland is such a beautiful country. It's got great history. The architecture is astoundingly gorgeous. It's fabulous. And that's what's really known. And what I think needs to be done now, and where we're really trying to highlight, is the forward future thinking Scotland. You know, all the other things that Scotland is doing to contribute to the world's technology, the modern world, and the innovation that's happening. That needs to be a stronger part of our brand as a country. And we're making small steps there. And I think that we have a big opportunity for us.
And I think it's almost, isn't it, going back to remember the times of the Enlightenment as well. You talk about Edinburgh, and I like reading up on my own history and stuff. And I remember reading that it was because Edinburgh was small enough that you could go for a walk and you could bump into all these great thinkers, that, you know, we actually have a who's who of inventors, Scots who made the world, you know, and you go through it and it's like, oh, the women's movement came out of Scotland, or, you know, here was penicillin, the telephone, the steam engine, this and that. And I think we sometimes forget our capacity as inventors and technology. And even if you look at John Muir, who is renowned as a naturalist, you know, in California, he also had this real passion for technology as well. And he kind of recognized that you had to balance technology and nature together at the same time. And what I really love about what you're saying is, you know, it's like, let's focus on the future, but actually, you know, we've got it already in our past, and maybe it's actually emphasizing that this is our past history as well, and this is what we can contribute moving forward.
That's absolutely correct. I don't quote me on this, but I do believe that Scotland has more inventors per capita than any other country around. And we have contributed hugely already to the global platform of the technology in the modern world that is being used today.
After COP26 is been and gone from Scotland, what do you want the legacy to be from the next 2 weeks, or from these 2 weeks?
I think the legacy is that people feel engaged, they feel motivated, and they feel empowered to do something. Right now, I'm concerned that too many people feel that something very desperate needs to be done, but nobody has the power to do it themselves. And I'm really hoping that out of COP26, that every single person who has attended feels that there is something that they can contribute to make the world a better place.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Irene, for taking the time to join me today and record this conversation for all our Scottish Net Zero community members.
You're very welcome. It was a pleasure. Thank you.